Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Yassin Terou, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Yassin Terou, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Oh, I'm doing just fine. Got a great weekend coming up, I hope.
Let's hope. I think we can use a little rest. You had a long day on Thursday, sitting there through the city council budget hearings.
Yeah, they started at 8 and went to almost 5, and then the one bonus, it's bad for democracy but good for me, was that no one spoke at the public hearing at 5, so I had to shorten the evening a little bit. Well, of course, I had to write about it, so it was
yeah. And you've had plenty of public forum at city council meetings lately. I would say you could probably take use a break.
That was okay. That was okay for me. Right. It's all about me.
That's right. We are actually not even... You spent all day there. You did write about it, and anybody who's interested in those budget hearings can find that coverage on our website. We're not even talking about it today because, honestly, not a whole lot happened there, although a lot of interesting detail in the budget. But we did have several other things happen this week that we are going to talk about. And first of all, I want to introduce... We have a guest in the studio with us, Owen McCarthy. Say hi, Owen.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
We're happy to have you. Owen is our summer intern here at Compass, and he joins us from Michigan State University. We're going to be talking to him a little bit later, get to know him a little bit, and ask the burning question, why does anybody want to go into journalism in the year 2024? We're going to talk about Knox Heritage, local preservation group, celebrating its 50th anniversary, and we had a nice write-up, actually, by Owen this week, about kind of their mission, what they've accomplished, what they're hoping to do in the future. An interesting, unusual challenge to a candidate petition in the District 9 County Commission race. Why does it matter? We'll talk about that. City of Knoxville got a comprehensive, exhaustive, one could say, study of downtown parking that made some interesting recommendations. We got an update on Knox County's debt situation, where some bills are coming due. But to start out, I thought we could talk a little bit about... So, Scott, we've talked in recent weeks about pro-Palestinian protests that we've had here in town for several months now at city council meetings. People have been standing up and speaking, of course, trying to get the city to adopt a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the war in Gaza. And then in more recent weeks, there have been some pretty active protests at the University of Tennessee on their campus. And so this week, that continued, but I guess the thing that really jumped out about this was, for the second time, the University of Tennessee actually arrested some people for basically protesting in the wrong place on campus. And so this had happened a few weeks ago. They arrested a group of 9 people, a mixture of students and non-students. This past week, they arrested 11 people. But what got everybody's attention was one of them was very well known.
Yeah, the nicest man in Knoxville.
who runs the designated nicest place in America. Yeah, Yassin Terou, who is, most people in Knoxville are probably aware of Yassin if they haven't met him personally. And lots of people in Knoxville have met Yassin personally. Yep. He's kind of everywhere all the time. But he owns Yassin's Falafel House, which started out as one location downtown. And now I think they have at least 3 of them around the area. There might be another one that has opened that I don't know of. So very popular, well-liked local restaurant chain, but Yassin himself, and I'm going to refer to him by his first name because everybody does, including his own restaurant. He is also a well-known figure because from the beginning, when he first started his restaurant, he's been active in sort of local civic affairs. He has always promoted his restaurant as sort of like a safe haven for people of all kinds. You know, he's had these big welcoming signs there. Everybody welcome, whether that's people of different, religions, ethnicities, sexual orientations, whatever. He's always kind of cultivated this very warm persona around himself and his businesses. He is involved in lots of charity work. He's provided food for relief efforts after several natural disasters. He's started a nonprofit called Seeds and Bridges, which, among other things, is working to provide both food and sort of job training to local unhoused people. So he's real active. He was the master of ceremonies for Knoxville Mayor India Kincannon's first inauguration back in 2019. Just a very well-known figure in Knoxville, and he has been active in the pro-Palestinian protest here the last few months, right?
Yeah, and in fact, when they've had the larger protests at city council meetings, he's brought food for them because those meetings last a long time, especially when you've got at least 100 people there protesting, and so. But he would bring food down. He spoke at one meeting on the ceasefire resolution. So
yeah, and his basic position, as I understand it, is calling for a ceasefire. He's calling for peace. He says he wants peace. He wants civilians. He's said both at public meetings and on social media, he wants killing to stop, civilians on all sides. But in particular, he has been supportive of calling for a ceasefire. And he was at a protest at the University of Tennessee Wednesday evening, and it was actually a vigil that was organized there. The group on campus that's been organizing their protest is called the People's School for Gaza. They're kind of holding public teach-ins to kind of educate people about the history of Palestine and the Middle East and kind of what's led up to the current situation. And they've also been organizing protests. This particular event last Wednesday was a vigil to mark what they called Nakba Day. And the Nakba, for people who aren't familiar with it, is the Arabic term that Palestinians use to refer to, it translates as catastrophe, essentially, and it refers to their expulsion from land that they were living on in the 1940s, the 1948 war that led to the establishment of Israel. And about half of the Palestinians who were living there, about 750,000 people at the time, were literally expelled from their homes, and of course have lacked an actual homeland ever since then. And so it's kind of interesting because, of course, Israel celebrates 1948 as the founding of the country, and so it's sort of a great kind of triumphant thing for Israel, and for Palestinians it's not celebrated but commemorated as a great historical catastrophe, which kind of gets to the heart of the ongoing situation there. But that's what this vigil was to mark. And so, Scott, the University of Tennessee has taken a somewhat delicate approach to all of this. Can you talk a little bit about how because of course we've seen protests at campuses around the country, often much larger protests than we're seeing here at UT Knoxville. But, it's been an issue how universities handle this. So how has UT been handling this so far?
Well, it's both UT and the protesters, because the protests have been nonviolent to the extreme. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been very peaceful. The UT has tried to let them speak and let them protest, but only at a certain time. They can't protest after 10 o'clock.
Right. They've been very clear. They don't want any encampments, which has been the issue at a lot of other campuses.
They do not want encampments, and one of the things that they've done is one thing they try to do is try to encourage them to file as an official campus organization, which gives them, they get to do more things that way, but they haven't so far, and which kind of isn't real surprising because they're protesting against the university, and that would be kind of like joining up with the man. But they the first night that they did arrest, and again Wednesday night, they had told them that, well, first of all, they've got a space for them now over in front of the student union on Cumberland Avenue. That's where they've told them, okay, you can go there, and you got to remember that there you can restrict time and place of speech.
Right.
Free speech isn't always unfettered speech. So
they can't. It has to be content neutral.
Content neutral, yes. But they had space in front of the student union. Wednesday night, they were gathered over in front of the College of Law, which is across Cumberland Avenue from the student union. They tried to get them to go there, and when they didn't go there, that's when they made the arrest on Wednesday. But that one of the things that they've done is they've said, okay, if you do this, you will get arrested. And for the most part, the protesters have complied. Although there have been a couple of nights that they've been there and stayed way beyond 10 p.m., which is the cutoff time. But for the most part, it's been hands off, except for those two occasions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and this gets into interesting jurisdictional issues, because a lot of the protesters who were there Wednesday, and I was not down there at the event, but of course I saw the coverage of it in other local media, were lining Cumberland Avenue on the sidewalk right next to the street, and that is actually city property, because Cumberland's a city street, and that's part of the city right-of-way, and they are allowed to be there, or at least the city hasn't said they're not allowed to be there. As long
as they don't block the sidewalk. And
right.
They weren't. From the images I saw, they weren't blocking the sidewalk.
Right. They weren't obstructing anything. But as soon as you step off of that sidewalk, say toward the College of Law, there on the north side of Cumberland, you're on university property. And so then jurisdiction changes, mm-hmm. and the university has been very clear about, well, no, we want your free speech to happen over here, not over here. And the statements that the university released about this, said, well, we want to make sure that we respect people's rights to free speech, but don't obstruct anybody else's ability to get around campus or to use the campus and so forth, which you can understand sort of conceptually. I think the question always becomes, at what point is it worth arresting people? Yeah. Because even in cases like this, where, trespassing is a relatively minor charge, now students who get charged could face worse sanctions than just the legal ones, because they can also be charged under student conduct violations at the university, and that can lead to bad consequences for them. But for, members of the general public, which would include Yassin, obviously, you can say, well, misdemeanor trespassing charge, not a big deal. Probably it'll get dismissed, or, be some very minor thing that can be expunged, which is all true. But it's still kind of a big deal to get arrested. And, what happened to the people who were arrested Wednesday? I mean, they were handcuffed. They were put, I was going to say thrown is an exaggeration, but they were put into like a paddy wagon, essentially. They had a big transport prisoner transport van there. They're driven all the way out to the Knox County Jail in East Knox County, and were there basically overnight, got out Thursday morning, and then have to face the legal, like they're going to have a court appearance. I'm sure they're going to have a lawyer, all of that. So, that's a fair amount to put people through for basically the offense of being on the wrong lawn or the wrong sidewalk, as the case may have been. And I think that Yassin's involvement and the widely publicized photos of him in handcuffs, and he was wearing sort of a cape of an American flag, which he has been bringing to protest to emphasize he's a naturalized citizen. He became a citizen in 2020. And of course, he's originally a Syrian refugee. So you kind of think about it, somebody who fled war and an authoritarian government in Syria, came to Knoxville, has become this sort of beloved American success story. He's been celebrated. We mentioned earlier, Reader's Digest in 2017 or 18 named his restaurant the nicest place in America. He was featured on Good Morning America. Just kind of like one of those feel-good, hey, you can pursue your dreams here. And he's very pro-American himself. When he got his American citizenship, he made a big deal of it on social media. He goes to the 4th of July celebrations every year. So the point that he's been trying to make is, I'm an American, I love America, and I'm exercising my free speech as an American. But when you get these pictures of him in handcuffs with his he had an American flag cape and a keffiyeh scarf, both kind of making the point that there's not a contradiction between these things. You can be, pro-Palestinian and patriotic American. And then even sort of more alarming to some people, the pictures when he got out of custody, still with his American flag, but with one of his arms in a sling. And he told the News Sentinel that he suffered some nerve damage in his hand during the whole process of being arrested and handcuffed and everything. It was the UT police officers who actually did the arrests. I don't know. I saw a lot of reaction, especially on, of course, there was a lot of media coverage, but also just a lot of reaction on social media from a lot of people saying, is this necessary? Did we have to lock up Yassin? Was this is this serving any real public interest?
Yeah, the one of the questions a lot of people have is, okay, they were peaceful. There's been no hint of violence erupting or anything at the UT protests, and you kind of sit there and go, well, yeah, as you said earlier, they got arrested for being on the wrong lawn, and so I think there's it's one thing, the protests at UCLA and at Columbia, where they were taking over buildings and causing damage and being very confrontational. Whether you might not agree with it, but you can see police arresting them. But these protests have been very, very peaceful, and a lot of people have a hard time reconciling those things.
Yeah, and there is discretion, obviously, on the university's part to decide, exactly where they're going to draw those lines and how they're going to respond, and if and when you go to the ultimate extent of, actually having people arrested. So, I'm sure there'll be more to come on all of this. So if Yassin actually suffered an injury, it's always possible there will be something that could come out of that, but then also the legal cases of those who were arrested. Of course, we'll all be paying attention to that.
And the war in Gaza goes on.
And the war in Gaza goes on.
So
right.
There is still something for them to protest about.
Well, in the university, of course, things on campus tend to quiet down during the summer, although not all the protesters were students to start with, and so protests could continue there. But the university is probably going to have to think about, really how they handle this. And I think a couple of things just to keep in mind about the factors going into those decisions. There's been a national reaction against the campus protests, very much from the right in this country and from the Republican Party, and Republicans in Congress have been holding hearings on all of this, and of course we have a Republican supermajority here in the state legislature that is not at all shy about rattling UT's cage when something happens on campus that they don't like. And so I feel like you always have to keep in mind when you're considering the university's response to really anything, but especially anything that's going to get the attention of the legislature, that's always in their minds too, because it can't not be. That's their biggest, I guess, second biggest amount of funding. Their biggest amount of funding comes from tuition. Is that right? Or the state is one of their top two sources of funding. Republicans in the state legislature have absolutely shown that they can and will just yank money away from UT if something happens on campus they don't like. And so I'm sure that's an issue there too. Yeah, Owen.
Yeah, I was just curious, has there been any sort of, I've heard that historically the faculty at UT have often sort of been at odds with the administration there. Has there been any sort of response from the faculty about how they feel about how these protests have been handled?
I haven't seen. There have been some faculty members actually out at some of the protests, but I don't know, Scott. Have you seen anything formal from?
I haven't seen anything formal.
Yeah,
okay. There's not been
the American Association of University Professors would be one organization that often does speak up, unless I've missed it. I haven't seen them yet make a statement about anything at UT related to the protests.
The one thing the professors I've spoken with since the protests have started have all been very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Mm-hmm. So there's been that. There was one professor who was reprimanded essentially for comments that they made during class about this. It was the professor actually was is Jewish but was very vocal and angry about what Israel was doing, and a student complained, and but it's not been there's not been anything real formal.
Okay,
so
yeah, but as it continues, like we may see that it's possible some of those other campus groups might get involved. So we'll obviously keep an eye on all of that. But for now, let's turn our attention to something a little more local, which is Knox County's debt burden. And Scott, this is a normal part of the budget. Our city and our county, both every year, they both of them carry debt. That's a normal governmental thing.
Yep. Mostly
taken out typically for infrastructure projects, capital investments, sort of big one-time purchases that you then pay out over a number of years. And so in Knox County's budget this year, they have about $80 million budgeted for debt payments. That's debt service on accumulated debt, that's been growing over time. And that in itself is up about $10 million from last year. It was about a $70 million payment there. And, $80 million out of the county budget is not a small amount. The county budget's it's $1.08 billion is the proposed budget this coming year. But so $80 million would be about 8% of that. However, it is projected to grow to $101 million a year over the next 5 years, so a fairly healthy increase there. And interestingly, and this is something that county finance people have known about for a long time, but everybody else is kind of becoming aware of it now because it's imminent. A bunch of debt that was taken out as long ago as 20 years ago is starting to come due now. And this is unusual because usually when a government, issues bond for something, 20 to 30 years is kind of the normal time frame that they'll issue those for, and then they'll pay it off over that time, like a normal, like when we get a mortgage or a car payment or something. But back in the early 2000s, which you remember, Scott, because you were covering county government at the time, County Mayor Mike Ragsdale's administration took a somewhat creative approach to financing things. And this is a bit of an old trick. This is not an unheard of thing, but it's not generally looked kindly on by finance and accounting professionals. They wanted to do some things and show that they were doing some things and kind of get the public credit for doing some things, making big investments and so forth. But they didn't want to pay for them right off the bat. And so they essentially took out some balloon loans. And, people may be familiar with balloon loans from balloon mortgages, which were among the things that led to the great crash of 2008, where for some set period of time, you just pay interest every year. And you don't start paying off the actual principal till, the back end of the loan. And that's what there's like 5 bond issues from between 2003 and 2008 that the county issued that were backloaded to various degrees, including one, a $69 million loan that the county took out in 2007, and they've been paying interest on it every year since 2007. They have not paid anything on the principal. And so they've been paying off this loan now for 17 years, and they still owe the entire principal. And all of that's going to come due between 2027 and 2034. And so suddenly, that loan goes from being $1 million a year or whatever they're paying in interest payments to $6, $7, $8, $9 million a year just on that one loan over that time. And there's 5 of these that, like I said, are backloaded to different degrees. And Chris Caldwell, the county's chief financial officer, kind of made a presentation on this to county commission at their finance committee meeting last week. And he just kind of said, well, this is coming, and we're all going to have to think about how we're going to pay for this. But he emphasized to them that the one option they don't have is not paying. He's like, we can all kind of sit here and say, this was a bad idea, 20 years ago. And of course, everybody in that administration who made all of those decisions, at least all the top decision makers, are long gone from county government.
Yeah. One of the things about that time was that Ragsdale's finance director at the time was a man named John Werner, and he came from the private sector. He had no government finance experience at all, and he's the only chief financial officer of any government that I've ever covered who did not have previous government accounting experience. Mm-hmm. So
maybe we see why.
Yeah, and I think that one thing may be that in the business world, which is where you came from, you can do more creative things like that to avoid paying that balloon loan at the end.
But also there's tax advantages and things that just don't exist in the public sector.
That's true.
You're not paying taxes, and so you don't get any tax benefit no matter how you structure the debt. Well, so, Caldwell, who made the point that he was in the finance department at the time, he was, I think, probably a pretty young Chris Caldwell at that point.
Yes, he was very young. Yes.
He's not an old guy now, but he was just sort of like a junior accountant. And he was just kind of, he told commissioners, look, I became finance director in 2013. So if you want to talk to me about anything that has happened since, I'll be happy to talk about it. Before that, all I can tell you is that, decisions were made, not by him. But so they're going to have to pay for this. And, again, it just helps highlight how much pressure and stress the county budget is under. We talked about County Mayor Glenn Jacobs' proposed budget the other week, which is up just a tiny amount from the current year, and most of the increase is in the school budget, not in the general county budget. And county employees are only getting functionally a 1% raise in the coming year because the county can't afford to pay them anymore. And this is a very tight budget. The county budget has been tight for years and years. There's a lot of sort of mythology out there in sort of the general public about quote unquote government waste. And of course there is government waste. There's plenty of government waste in all sorts of different levels and places. However, anybody who's been following Knox County government in recent years can tell you that this is a tight budget. There is not much in it year to year. They have like an 80-year rotation for paving their roads because that's all they can afford to do. And this is just going to add another, as this debt burden grows, it just adds another layer of pressure on that budget. And of course, the big thing that is just kind of sitting out there that does get mentioned from time to time in these county finance meetings is the county has a couple of major sources of funding: property taxes and sales taxes. Sales taxes, as we know, fluctuate with the economy and inflation and so forth. But property taxes are under the county's control. They can raise them. They just don't.
Yeah. That was one of the things that was kind of interesting about that discussion is that phrase tax increase was avoided almost at all costs.
Yeah.
When Chris Caldwell says we need to do something about our revenues, that's what he says.
Right.
He doesn't say you're probably going to have a tax increase in a couple of years.
Right.
He didn't.
Well, there's only a couple of places they can go for tax increases.
Yeah.
They can raise their property taxes, or there is still, I think, a half cent left under state law that they could go up on sales taxes, right?
Yeah, that's a possibility as well. One thing is to raise the sales tax has to be by referendum.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking people to increase taxes on themselves, and as we know, the sales tax is a very regressive tax, and now
so we already have one of the highest sales taxes in the country.
And now it can be done. The city did it. Former Mayor Victor Ashe pushed through a sales tax increase, but it's been 30 years or so. Or longer. So.
Yeah, and so but those are basically the options they have. There is not some other magical pot of money unless Chris or somebody in his department is just out there buying a bunch of Powerball tickets or something. But it's just interesting to see, and this squeeze it gets a little bit. They got some relief with the huge jumps in sales tax revenue coming out of the pandemic, but that's flattening out now. And of course, one result of all of that is that everything's more expensive now because of the inflation we had during that time. And so their expenses are up, but their revenues are flattening, and their debt burden is going up. So that's the state of the county finances right now.
And in case anyone's wondering, the city's debt situation is the exact opposite.
Yeah,
the city's debt is about $151 million. Right now, and they're not planning. Their budget's fairly tight this year too. It's not tight, but there aren't any big projects that are coming up that they're going to have to borrow money for, and they're not going to borrow any money this year unless catastrophe happens.
Yeah,
and they'll be paying down the debt by this time next year. The debt will be down to $132 million.
Right, and so in contrast, the total county debt right now is about $890 million. Total, and of course that includes the school system, and the school system does make up the biggest chunk of that, and they have been building new schools in recent years. We've had 3 new elementary schools open. There's a 4th new one planned for Farragut, another new school likely over in the Western Heights area. There's discussion about that. And so there will probably be continued, if you look at the county's 5-year debt plan, they are planning to even take on more debt. But, of course, you do reach a point in the future where some of that old debt starts to get paid off and roll off. But, yes, the county debt situation is much different than the city's. Okay, speaking of the city and city infrastructure, downtown parking, perennial issue of discussion, angst, consternation. Some people say there's not enough downtown parking or it's too hard to park downtown. Other people say there's plenty of downtown parking and it's easy and maybe even too easy to park downtown. And so the city contracted with some consultants to study this for them, and that report was finally released this week after many months of cogitation, I guess, by the consultants.
Yeah, the firm is Walker Construction Consultants, and they were asked to conduct a comprehensive study on all elements of parking, from the number of spaces to how much they charge, the hours of operation, everything that goes together. And one of the things that they determined is the city has a parking fund. And so they which is a what they call an enterprise fund. It means that the revenues that are generated by whatever activity is going on go to pay for that activity. Like they've got a golf course fund where all of your greens fees and everything at the 2 city-owned golf courses, go to the operation of the golf courses. They're supposed to pay for themselves. Well, the parking fund doesn't. And so one of the goals was to make it self-sustaining. And also, they think it needs to be managed better. The city needs to have a single parking coordinator, because it's just not the city, and PBA and the firm that manages this Civic Auditorium and Coliseum. Those all have a hand in parking and enforcement and everything else. So, but there's no one person in the city who's in charge of it. Anyway, but nobody cares about that in the public. We want to know how much we're going to have to pay to park, and that is the short answer is a lot of people are going to have to pay more. If the
city adopts any of these recommendations.
One thing I need to really make this caveat is this is just a study with recommendations. It is not a proposal that the city is planning to move forward on. They will likely cherry pick from it and implement some and not implement others. That's what they did with the middle housing report. So don't panic when we talk about what could happen, because it may or may not happen. But the primary one recommendation is on parking garages, and to answer your question about is there enough parking, the consultant said yes, there's plenty of parking, especially in the garages. The thing is, it's not evenly distributed. The Market Square garage sometimes gets full and is very busy almost every day, whereas the Dwight Kessel garage, which is actually county owned, on the other end of downtown, behind the Andrew Johnson building, is never full. There's always a space there.
It's also a decent distance from most of the things people want to go to.
Yeah,
it's what 5 or 6 blocks from kind of the heart of downtown.
Yeah, for those of us who like to park right in front of where we go, then that's it's a fur piece. But for anybody who it's less than the distance from the outer edge of the Westtown Mall parking lot.
Right.
So
true enough.
So but anyway, the hourly rate would, according to these recommendations, would remain the same. It's $1 an hour in the city garages, $2 in the county garages. But their recommendations were for the city garages, so make that clear. But the hourly rate would remain at $1 an hour. So you think, okay, that sounds great. Well, yeah, except for Market Square garage, because it is so busy, they would charge more. I think $1.50 for
pay for proximity.
Yes, and also it could persuade people to use the other garages that aren't used as often. But there are a couple of things. One is, for years, parking at night and on the weekends has been free. After 7:00, you can, go there and
everybody knows it. Like, if there's one thing that everybody who parks downtown probably knows about downtown parking, it's that nights and weekends are free in the city garages.
Right, and that was essentially used to attract people to come downtown. Now that downtown's been revitalized, it's there's talk that it's not needed anymore. And one thing that the consultant didn't recommend never having them free, but did recommend moving two things: moving the time that the free period starts to 10 p.m. which would be a benefit to people who go to the shows or stay out late at some of the night spots and things like that. The people who just go downtown for dinner and then leave, not so much. They would do something that to capture the people who park, the money from the people who park before the free period begins, but leave after it
right. So
starts.
if you park at like 2 p.m, but you don't leave until 7:00 at night, when the gates go up, you don't pay for those hours, even the paid time hours that you were there.
Right.
You just get to leave.
Yeah. You park for free. And like you said, you can park there at 2, you get 5 hours of free parking. And if you leave at 8, then you're fine. Yeah. But what they're talking about doing is changing the technology, keep the bars that come down across the lanes, keep them down. Now they just leave them up. You don't even have to slow down to leave. And then when you get there, you'd have to pay for the hours that you
were actually on the clock.
On the clock, yes.
Yeah.
So that would be a big deal.
What about weekends?
Same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but I mean, are they talking about charging during the day on weekends? Yeah. Is that how?
Yeah. The another component of this is charging more for metered parking. We go from $1 to $1.50.
Well, I think it is $1.50.
That's our $1.50 to $2.
Right. Yeah.
An hour, and that is to get people to park in the garages instead of.
Well, the same way that right now the metered spaces are $1.50 to $1 for the garages, to kind of right, and that makes it makes practical sense because there's a lot fewer street parking spaces downtown. I counted once, and there were in the vicinity of 300 or 400 versus the I don't know what 9,000 or 10,000 garage spaces that there are out there.
There are more than 9,000 public spaces in the garages.
Right. So those are premium spots on the street because, as you said, everybody likes to park as close as possible to where they're going.
Currently the cost differential is not a deterrent to parking on the streets. It's more of a convenience thing than anything else. But they're also looking at the uses of those spaces. I made one recommendation that will probably go over like a lead balloon if the city tries to initiate it in the loading spaces. The spaces throughout downtown where deliveries can be made and delivery trucks can park there and do that without, and they don't pay. And so what talking about doing is charging the businesses in the vicinity for the space. So another thing that they're talking about, this is back to the garage. I'm sorry to go back to the garage part of it, but the monthly fees, they were recommending that those go up.
Which are mostly downtown residents and employees who get money. And those, I think for residents, they get like a 50% discount, right, on the normal monthly charge. Yeah, and a lot of these spaces are reserved by businesses, and they pay for those. Those are contract driven, so you have to wait to renegotiate the contract to do that. But it can be significant. The garage that's at the I don't know the official name of it, but it's under the Bank of America building on Main Street. I think it's just the Main Street Garage, I believe.
It might be. It's in the report, but the report's 168 pages long, and there are a few details that have escaped me. But it's mostly tenants of the employees who are of the tenants of the building. So there are spaces there for the general public, but a lot of them are already spoken for. Anyway, all of these things are they're also looking at doing mobile payment where you can pay for a parking space with your phone. So it's, they're looking at a lot of technological solutions, or at least they're calling for them. The consultant is. But a lot of this will take infrastructure investment. I mean, you've got to change all this technology. You've got to buy new technology. It's nothing of the sort is budgeted, even remotely considered in the budget that's under consideration by City Council at the moment for next year. So anything that requires any kind of investment would be at least a year away, and some of the changes would require ordinance changes. So City Council would have to vote on them to actually do that. And so the city had just they just received the report on Wednesday, so they will they're going to take a look at it over the next year or so, and eventually come up with a proposal of some sort. I imagine they may not. They may just
well, and
leave it on the shelf.
They are already getting feedback on this. In fact, they got feedback on it before the report was even out, because the day before the city released that report, a group of downtown business owners who had conducted their own online survey of people's parking habits and preferences, they released their survey results, which they got more than 15,000 responses to. Now, granted, this is not a scientific survey. It was circulated online via social media. But they did get a lot of input on it. And in a shocking turn of events, it transpires that most people don't want to pay more for parking. 97%, more than 14,800 responses out of the people who responded to the survey said that they strongly opposed, not just opposed, strongly opposed any reduction in the current levels of free parking that are available. More than half of people said they wanted more free time, but 97%, and then there was another 1% that was somewhat opposed to it. So you had a total of 98% of the responses on this thing said absolutely not. Do not change. We like the way it is. We like our free nights and weekends in the garages. You had business owners saying that this would be bad for them in terms of both their employees and their customers. You had downtown employees saying, look, it's already enough of a hassle to try to park downtown as an employee, and a lot of downtown employees are service sector employees who don't make a lot of money. And so there was a lot of responses along those lines, like it's going to just make things even harder for people there. And then downtown visitors, 75% of the people who responded to that survey were not business owners or employees, but were just people who like to come downtown for various reasons. And lots of people said, if I have to pay more, I'm just going to go somewhere else. Now, that's an easy thing to say. Will people actually do that? The parking study suggests that, in fact, going up this level of charge probably won't have a huge impact on people's actual behavior. And if you look at other cities, and this is something that city officials like to point out, Knoxville is an extremely good deal right now compared to most other cities of its size, not to mention larger cities. If anybody has tried to park in Nashville in the last 5 years and has gotten in and out of anywhere for under $20, good for you.
Yeah, the consultant's report made several comparisons with peer cities, and Knoxville's by far the cheapest. Yeah, to park. So,
on the other hand, of course, you have the argument that, well, downtown has done very well under this regimen, and there is kind of if it's not broke, why are you messing with it? And, I guess the city's argument would be, well, it's costing money, and that gets into a whole philosophical debate about, should public parking be something that, quote unquote, pays for itself, or is it just a public good that the government provides in the way it provides lots of other, we don't expect our parks, for example, to pay for themselves, and so does public parking have to pay for itself? I mean, that's another whole question.
One of the things the consultant pointed out is that because the parking operations are subsidized from the general fund, which is the property taxes and sales taxes and those things, to the tune of about $250,000 over the last several years, and 5 years. And because of that everybody in the city, whether they go downtown or not, pays for parking downtown. So,
and it's subsidizing a lot of people who don't live in the city,
yes,
who drive in from the surrounding county areas or surrounding counties. I mean, if you go through the downtown garages on any given weekend, you see license plates from, Loudoun County, Union County, Blount County.
Yeah.
It really is a magnet. And so that would be obviously one of the arguments for, say, charging on weekends when you get a lot of those out of city visitors. Like, well, let's have them help to pay for this infrastructure that they're using. So I guess we'll see, obviously, like you say, the city will have to digest this and probably come out with some kind of proposal. Any changes they make will probably be controversial, because I can say from my time working in city government, when we decided to just leave the garages the heck alone, like we're not even touching that one, but we did raise rates on the street meters and actually started enforcing parking downtown, which wasn't really enforced up to that point. And we were told by many people that we were just about to kill downtown. And, that was 8 years ago. And downtown hadn't been killed yet.
Speaking of enforcement, the recommendation is also to increase the fine for parking tickets, essentially. So
right, from $11 to $26. Is that what you're talking about? $26 might get people's attention a little bit.
That's for overstaying at the meter,
right?
And it could. I think a lot of people tend to ignore parking tickets.
What?
And
no, that never happens.
No, well, young Scott ignored plenty of parking tickets. There was one time it was kind of funny. I was working at the News Sentinel, had a very small garage. You couldn't park there. You had to park out somewhere in a garage or street. So I parked on the street a lot. I got a lot of parking tickets, and I remember one time I got another, and I was really bad in my 20s and 30s, but I had an expired tag and got ticketed for that. So I go to court to pay it, and Judge Rawson is there, and he knew me and I knew him and all. I'd gotten my tag renewed, and the officer checked it. He said, "Okay, yeah, it's dismissed. You pay your court costs, but the ticket's dismissed." I said, "Thank you, Your Honor," and started to leave. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Barker, by the way, what are you going to do about these $85 worth of parking tickets that you've accumulated?" And I just was, oh. I said, "I'll pay him right now, Judge."
Such a scofflaw.
I was.
Can't believe the example you're setting for young Owen here. This is terrible. I will say that about 10 years ago, there was a singer in a well-known local band was notorious for having a trunk full of parking tickets. I don't know if anybody ever managed to collect them. Okay, let's talk about a sort of interesting little thing that popped up here over the last few weeks in the District 9 County Commission race. District 9 is South Knox County, so it's all of South Knoxville and then down through the rest of the county to the county line. And we have already talked about that this is going to be an interesting race. There was a Republican primary where attorney Andy Fox defeated community advocate Barry Neal. And so he's the Republican candidate. There's Democratic candidate Matthew Park. And then there is an independent candidate, Stacey Bryan Smith. So Fox is interesting, as we've talked about here a bit, because he's an attorney and is a real political activist, kind of culture warrior type, very active in fighting for Second Amendment issues. He is a big enthusiast for people's firearms freedoms. He has been a consulting attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the biggest national conservative legal group, basically leading the fight against the expansion of LGBTQ rights. And he was very active in the local anti-public health mandate movement during COVID. He's a fighter. He's an ideological fighter, and he will basically make no bones about telling you that. So he's an interesting candidate because that is not the normal profile of county commission candidates in general. We haven't had a whole lot of, county commission tends to be people who come up through neighborhood associations or, local business leaders or whatever who are engaged with local issues. And Fox has made clear that his real interest is in kind of fighting what he sees as these larger existential ideological battles. Democrat Matthew Park is young, successful IT consultant, works for Cirrus Aircraft. And he's raised a good chunk of money, especially for a Democrat running in a district that has been traditionally held by Republicans. Of course, Fox has also raised a fair amount of money. And Park is kind of presenting himself as a fresh face in that district. He also happens to be gay and is married, and so sets up an interesting contrast, sort of ideologically and culturally, with Fox. And then you have Stacey Smith. So there hasn't been a whole lot of discussion of Smith to this point. He had not raised, as of, when he filed his campaign finance forms a few months ago, he didn't report raising or spending any money. It wasn't clear that he was necessarily going to be much of a factor in the race, which is often the case with independent candidates in, where you have two party candidates. You might have an independent candidate who picks up a handful of votes from people who just know them and like them or are disenchanted with the major parties or whatever, but it's not that common for an independent candidate to have much of an impact in these races. So earlier, but Smith had formerly identified as a Republican, and he actually initially took out petitions to run as either a Republican or an independent. He ended up filing as an independent, but that kind of tells you a little bit about where he's coming from. And there was a complaint filed against him and against his nominating petition by a guy named Martin Ammons, who's a Republican Party activist. He's actually the treasurer of the county Republican Party, and he is aligned with the group that has taken to calling themselves the Knox County Conservative Republicans. And so this is, for shorthand, I think he kind of called them the more Trump-oriented Republicans, again, very strongly ideological end of the party that has challenged kind of the party establishment in a lot of local races. They've had some wins and some losses. Former county chair Daniel Herrera was part of that group, and of course he had an unsuccessful run for law director this year. And a lot of that group kind of revolves around, or is at least connected to, local campaign consultant Eric Wyatter, who we've talked about before. Wyatter has had some success getting candidates elected to county commission and to state legislature with Elaine Davis the other year. And Wyatter is working with Andy Fox on his campaign. Ammons is a supporter of Fox. He signed Fox's nominating petition. So that's the background of the guy who filed this complaint. He filed a complaint against Stacey Smith, alleging that so you have to have 25 verified signatures of eligible voters in whatever district you're running in order to get on the ballot. So Smith turned in a petition, this was back in December, with 34 signatures. The election commission went through those, and they verified that 29 of those were eligible voters in the 9th district, and so that qualifies him to be on the ballot as an independent. So Ammons now has gone through that whole petition and is challenging 18 of those signatures, saying that they don't match the signatures on file for those voters with the election commission on their voter cards, and or in some cases the address that they put on the petition is different than the address that's on their voter registration form. And so, kind of alleging that, well, these aren't actually eligible voters. And this is unusual. We don't have a lot of these kinds of challenges. The election commission actually had to call a special meeting this week just to decide how they are going to handle this. They're going to have to hold a hearing on it. It's basically a quasi-judicial proceeding. And so they've set that hearing for June 7th, which is a Friday. It's going to be at 5:30 on a Friday in the small assembly room. And the reason that they're setting it then is because the state election coordinator, Mark Goings, under state law, has to be present for these hearings. It's part of his duties in overseeing elections across the state. So he has to come over from Nashville. And so they had to do it at a time when he could actually be here, which means that I'm going to get to go to a meeting at 5:30 on a Friday in a couple weeks. Really looking forward to that one. It will actually be interesting because it's going to be sort of a judicial proceeding where Ammons will get to make a presentation, and then Smith will get to make a presentation, and election commission members can kind of ask questions, and then they're going to have to decide what they think about all this. But I talked to Stacey Smith about it this week, and he just basically said, this is ridiculous, because he said all 18, every one of those that's being challenged are either people who he's related to. And he went through the list. It's like his wife, his dad, his 4 uncles, his father-in-law, brother-in-law, mother-in-law, cousins. Like, these are all people he knows. He knows who they are and where they live and that they're registered to vote. He's like, they're all real people. They are who they say. And then the other people on it are 7 people who he goes to church with, including 2 pastors. And again, he's like, I know every single one of these people. Like, typically, if you were going to get a challenge to something, it would be, oh, somebody put down like a false name or address or whatever. And he said, this is absolutely not the case here. And this whole thing is being trumped up. What's interesting, I think, about it politically is that, like I said, this was already going to be a kind of interesting race between Fox and Park because they're such different candidates with clearly very different visions. South Knoxville, South Knox County has been a bit in flux politically. The precincts within the city limits there south of the river have been trending more Democratic. The areas, the more rural areas and suburban areas outside, more Republican. But the last race that we had there, the school board race 2 years ago, was closer than a lot of people thought it would be. Christie, the Republican, won, but it was not... She was sweating a little bit on election night. And so you kind of look at that district and think, well, depending on turnout, it already could be an interesting race just with Fox and Park. But then you put this other candidate in there, and Smith says that he is not campaigning super hard. You don't see a lot of signs out there for him. He actually said he's ideologically opposed to campaign signs. He thinks they're a waste of resources and bad for the environment, and like, why are we even doing this in the first place? And so he has spent $750 of his own money. He hasn't raised money from anybody else, just to print up some cards with his name on it, which he said he printed on recycled paper. Again, he has sort of an environmentalist bent, which is reflective of South Knoxville and South Knox County to some degree, of course, down there with the urban wilderness and everything. And he said, I was not really planning to run much of a campaign here, just kind of, he's pretty well known. His family's well connected within their community. And so he knows he'll get some support from those folks. And beyond that, he's just kind of going around talking to community groups. But he was pretty mad about this whole allegation that he's somehow, committed fraud on his nominating petition. And so, assuming that he doesn't get knocked off the ballot, and it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of evidence that's going to do that, he said he's going to be a little more active now. And he actually said they've kind of they've messed up the Republicans challenging him because, to be honest, the people who he knows and the people who know his family may be people who would be more naturally likely to vote for the Republican candidate. And if this is already potentially a close race and you're looking at a third-party candidate who might disproportionately draw from the Republican candidate, but it's people associated with... Now, Fox himself hasn't said anything about this, but it's people associated with Fox who... Ammons took out the complaint. Eric Wyatter, Fox's campaign consultant, hand-delivered the complaint to the election commission. So you can't really say that people involved in Fox's campaign are not involved in this effort.
Wouldn't that be the assumption, though, is that's why they bothered with the complaint, because they feel like that is a threat to their voter base? That's mostly where this independent's going to steal from, so wouldn't that be the way we don't have to worry about them stealing from us is just get rid of them?
Presumably that would be the thinking. The danger, of course, is the sort of old poke the bear theory where maybe this wasn't going to be much of a factor in this campaign, but if he survives I guess I would say if you're going to make that challenge in that situation, you'd better be pretty sure that you're going to succeed, because if not, you've got a candidate who's still on the ballot and he and all of his supporters are not going to be super happy about this. So anyway, it's just...
Well, one of the things, too, is there's the alienation factor. Presumably if he stayed on the ballot, and he would draw voters, who otherwise would vote for Fox. Now, even if they prevail and he's not on the ballot, all of his friends and family and the people he knows and all I don't know if they'll vote for Park, but they certainly won't vote for Fox.
Yeah. I mean, it does. It seems. It's strategically interesting. I guess is the neutral way to describe it, and we'll see what impact it has. But again, this is not the kind of thing that we see happen very often, especially with an independent candidate, where people just often just don't assume they're going to really have much of an impact on the race. We will see. I should also mention, because I did ask Wyatt about his involvement in this in delivering the complaint, and he basically said, Martin Ammons was working that day. I was doing him a favor, and it's just important that candidates follow the rules and that our elections have integrity. But he also mentioned to me that there was another complaint against Smith having to do with campaign finance. So I went and tracked that down, and that complaint was basically saying that he had failed to properly disclose his own contributions to his campaign, because his initial disclosure just listed 0 for having any money. He has actually contributed $750 of his own money to the campaign. So that's what the complaint was about. I checked with the DA's office, because that's where those complaints go to, violation of campaign finance law. And the DA's office basically said, yeah, we understand that that's being resolved with an amended filing, which is not that uncommon. People file amended campaign disclosure forms all the time. And so Smith told me that, yes, he did file that this week. You can find that online now, and he has accounted for that $750, which is probably the end of that particular complaint.
That happens a lot, especially with people who have never run for office before, and they don't realize that even if you just go and pay for the signs with your own personal credit card, you still have to account for it in the paperwork.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So until something somebody complains or the election commission points it out to them or whatever.
Yeah, that's what if you have a campaign treasurer who's worked on previous campaigns, which a lot of sort of more major party candidates will, then that person will kind of try to keep you on the straight and narrow. Yeah. But for an independent candidate who's just he doesn't have a campaign staff, it's just him, right?
Running as a hobby, essentially.
Exactly. So anyway, we'll see what happens there. The next thing will be that hearing on June 7th, and then of course, if he remains on the ballot, we will have full coverage of that race, along with all of the races on the August 1st ballot. But just a interesting little wrinkle.
And every election has one.
Yep. Okay, now we're going to bring in Owen to talk about, he wrote for us this week a very good overview of Knox Heritage, marking its 50th anniversary. And of course, for those of us who live here and have been around Knoxville for a long time, we know Knox Heritage well and some of the things they've been involved in. So Owen, kind of interesting for you as somebody just arriving in town and being handed this assignment. What did you find out about Knox Heritage, and what struck you about them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what struck me about Knox Heritage, well, for one, I mean, I was just surprised to hear that this whole group started, because sort of a concerned group of citizens got together back 50 years ago, because the Bijou Theater was about to be torn down, and the sort of the historical types here were explaining to me that that place had become sort of an embarrassment. It was like a porn theater.
Yeah.
So
it served a lot of shady purposes over the years.
Right. And so kind of what the city was saying is like, okay, let's get rid of this. We want a parking lot, and it's a porn theater anyway, so it's fine. But then there was sort of a coalition of people who said, well, this place has been around for a long time, and they sort of got to the core of what this group has been about ever since, is that historical places, no matter what kind of how they change over time, they people have shared memories in a community of these places, and it ultimately strengthens a community. And so, even now on their 50th anniversary, every person I talked to and I said, well, what have been the biggest triumphs over time? They all said, well, you have to mention that first triumph, because it just really has staying power for them and kind of reminds them of their mission. So, yeah.
Yeah, the Bijou Theater, proclaimed by the New York Times as one of the finest listening rooms in the nation.
Yeah.
Because it has amazing acoustics, because, of course, it was built pre-amplification,
right.
and it was built for sound on stage to kind of carry to the whole room. And, just a delightful building and landmark. And, Scott, we could probably all list our favorite things that Knox Heritage has had a hand in preserving, because at this point it's quite a roster.
Yeah, and one of the things, I think one of the reasons they like to refer back to the Bijou is that not only did they save the Bijou, I mean they've saved a lot of buildings or worked to get them saved, but they turned it, it's been turned into one of the jewels of the city. At the Tennessee Theater, there are a couple other, a couple of churches. They're really, those are the things that we all Knoxvillians look at with pride, and so not only did they save it, but the transformation was extraordinary and lasting.
And kind of set a template for what eventually happened with downtown revitalization more broadly, because as people started to reinvest in old buildings downtown in the late 90s and early 2000s, the key factor there was that, and of course we had lost many buildings by that point. All of the surface parking lots downtown used to be buildings, so many things had been knocked down. But still, we had the whole stretch down Gay Street and a lot of other areas of downtown. We had these old, in a lot of cases, really beautiful, underutilized buildings that Knox Heritage was very involved in working with developers in thinking about, okay, how can you go in and reuse the Emporium building, the Sturkey building, like all of these landmarks that are still there. I went to a presentation about, I'm going to say it was 8 or 9 years ago, by the mayor of Greenville, South Carolina, which is another, it's a smaller city than Knoxville, but it's a city a lot of people look to for kind of having done successful downtown revitalization, and it's a cool little town. And he was kind of talking about all the different things they'd done in Greenville, and then somebody asked him, well, what do you think about Knoxville? Because he'd been here for a few days, and he said, what you guys have that we don't, and that a lot of cities don't, is you've got buildings. You still have places that were built, 80, 100 years ago that are still here, and the stock of buildings that you have and the way that they've been, preserved and returned to productive use is pretty remarkable. And so Knox Heritage, obviously not the only factor in that, but they've been a very consistent and effective advocate, I would say, for preservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's interesting from Owen's story was kind of they're not satisfied with just preserving historic buildings as a whole. Owen, talk a little bit about what their not a shift in focus, but an additional focus that they're having on things that are happening for the future.
Yeah. That was a focus of the story. And as they're kind of thinking about their 50th anniversary is, we always hear about how Knoxville, in this area, more people are coming in with each year. I think if I'm recalling correctly, this year it saw a drop off in the percent increase in how many people came in, but still more people come in each year. And so Knoxville's changing a lot. When you're driving on the interstate and you look out it's looking increasingly different. There's the new stadium right now. And Knox Heritage is saying, though, with all these sort of out of town developers who are coming in, Knox Heritage tries to reach out right away and make that contact and say, we're here. We want to have, we want to at least be a part of the conversations about how our city looks going forward. And so that doesn't mean they want to, if it's an area that, is vacant or something, or doesn't involve, a historic property. It's not like they're going to try to have a say in every project, but they at least want to be sure that these developers are mindful of the area, the aesthetic, and whatever historic properties may be there. So they're very much so thinking, they intend to be a part of these conversations about how Knoxville develops going forward.
All right. Well, you can find that article on our website And you can find out more about Knox Heritage at their website, knoxheritage.org. Okay, we are to our interview segment, and this week we're going to interview Owen because he's been in Knoxville now for just about 2 weeks. Came to us from Michigan State University. Owen, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how did you get to Knoxville this summer?
Yeah. So my name is Owen McCarthy. I'll be a junior next year at Michigan State University. I study journalism. I write for my student newspaper there. And I started looking for work, after your sophomore year is when people are all kind of talking, internships. And frankly, it was pretty stressful when everyone, I had friends who had their internships lined up already. And I was like, okay, well, I need to figure something out. And I immediately kind of thought, well, Knoxville, because I've been visiting Knoxville since I was 9 years old because my grandmother lives here. And so it's always been, frankly, kind of like a magical place to me, not because I can remember my sister and I, anytime we'd get off the highway and get toward my grandmother's house, we'd have our pillows on the car ride and be screaming into the pillows because we were so excited to go to grandma's house and everything. And so Knoxville has just always been a really special place to me for that reason. And so I started to think, well, I could, move down to Knoxville and live with grandma for a summer. And also, if I can land a job, fill that requirement because for my major, you need to have internship experience. And also internship experience is good. It makes sense they have that requirement because you learn. And so I reached out to Jesse and Scott, actually. And this is kind of weird. You guys are interviewing me and I'm saying I'm Jesse and Scott. I reached out to you guys and said, hey, I see you guys are sort of a small operation and I would love to kind of help out if you guys would have the room. And you guys were receptive to it. And so now I'm, living with my grandma so I don't have to pay rent. She also helps out with groceries. So it works out great there. And I'm working at Compass and really enjoying it so far. So.
And sitting for hours in the city council budget hearings and thinking, maybe I made a mistake.
Well, that was good. I felt a little bad for him, so let him.
No. You look, if you're going to get into journalism, you got to know what the deal is.
Yeah,
that's part of the deal.
But that's one of the things. That's one of the values of internships. You can. The classroom work is all well and good.
Yeah.
But getting out and actually doing the work is invaluable. So
So I'm curious, as I said at the top of the episode, just kind of talk to you. I majored in journalism. I graduated from college in 1991, and at the time, that seemed like maybe a less crazy thing to do than it does now. I mean, I remember hearing all the horror stories about how low paid it was and everything. The problem with that is, I was in high school and I was used to making minimum wage, which at the time was very low, working for restaurants. And so when I looked at, starting journalism salaries when I was 16, I was like, oh, that doesn't sound bad because you don't really have a good reference point. But these days, it seems to me that all of the major news you hear about journalism is not great, at least at the sort of legacy media level, the big newspaper chains and the kind of constant cuts and acquisitions that we've seen. So, what interested you about journalism and why?
Yeah, it's so. I mean, when I first started thinking about what I wanted to study in college, I don't know. I tried not to get bogged down too much by, what industries are going to be great and make me a lot of money and which ones aren't, because I think the feeling around this time was kind of like everywhere is bad to an extent, and I was just, a lot of my peers in high school, we would see news articles about, how, for example, I would see statistics about the likelihood that someone from my generation would be able to afford my parents' house, for example, by the time I got out of college. And it could just feel really depressing. So I was kind of like, well, I'm going to college. I'm just going to pick something. Anything I do is in engineering, that kind of thing, business, those things were never on my radar. Those things that you could make an argument, well, you will make a lot of money there, just never even in my brain at all. So I was like, maybe journalism. I had been writing for my high school's paper, and we weren't great. I don't think we took ourselves too seriously, but there was one story I did that I think it gave me my first kind of feeling of maybe I want to do this, and it was like a satire piece, because at this time there was a trend online and on TikTok where basically kids, this was like right after we got out of COVID and quarantine, so everyone had lost their heads, and it was called like devious licks. Did you ever hear about this?
I think I missed that one.
It was like hashtag devious lick on TikTok, and basically kids would go into bathrooms in public schools and just vandalize them, just break sinks, toilets, paper towel dispensers. It was just a big thing. I was actually just looking at all the articles. It was like all the national media had picked it up. It was just these kids are going wild.
The national media loves to freak out about what the kids are doing on TikTok.
Right. And so that was kind of going on, and I was at a lunch table with a lot of these guys who I didn't really care for, and I would kind of like get in arguments with them, and one of the things that I disagreed with was they would basically like terrorize our janitors and like the lunch staff, like the lunch ladies. They would just it was this one old guy who was just he was like an assistant coach of the softball team, and he would help out at lunch, and they would just like throw garbage and apples at the wall, and like it was just this really cartoonish, ridiculous thing that they just did to like get a rise out of the administrators and this particular guy. And I just was really thought it was stupid, and so I wrote this story that was like basically poking fun at like one or two guys who I sat with at lunch who I just really didn't like, and I wanted to write the story to sort of bring attention to it and like kind of just make fun, but it was bigger than just them. There was a lot of people basically vandalizing school property just for no reason at this time. And so I wrote the story, and kind of what the premise was these kids who I knew that their parents were like super well off, like lawyers and business people, so it was like these just kind of privileged kids who are making the lives of the low paid public school staff miserable. And people kind of got pissed off when it came out in our paper. There was this one kid who like really thought it was about him, and it wasn't, but he was like on social media, like posting about it and like calling me names. And I remember like in our staff meeting, our advisor like had to sit us down and be like, okay, here's our line. If people like question us about that story, like here's what we say. And what she said was like, if you think it's about you, then it kind of is, it's a satire piece. And so I just remember feeling really kind of like I had accomplished something on a very small scale. And I know the guys at my lunch table, they would always pick up the newspaper and kind of like make fun of it to me, because I was the editor in chief. That was like one of the things they would do to get under my skin. But that day when that paper came out, they didn't say anything. And so I took it as a win. And so I just remember thinking, I wrote something and it got people to think about something on a little bit of a deeper level, and maybe it made things a little bit better. And so then I was like, maybe journalism. Then I got scared out of it, and I heard all the horror stories. I heard everyone telling me, you won't make any money. So I actually majored in construction management because I had an uncle who had done well in that, and there was a job fair at my school. And I did that for a semester at Michigan State, and then I switched to journalism. Because I was like, no, like I need to go for it because I know I'm passionate about it, and it's really paid off. I work for my paper there now, and I absolutely love it. So yeah,
that's great. Well, I can really relate to some parts of that, because when I was in high school, I wrote for my student paper, but then my senior year, me and some friends started a quote unquote underground paper, which we published under pseudonyms, but like everybody knew who it was that was doing it. And we wrote about sort of serious. We wrote a story about teachers who were uncomfortably flirtatious with female students and named names and things like that. But we wrote what a lot of it was kind of satirical, and we wrote one piece kind of making fun of quote unquote popular kids and cliques, and just how sort of socially insecure people were, but it wasn't actually aimed at anybody.
Yeah.
And I think it even included the line somewhere in it, like, if you think this is about you, it probably is. So somebody took that literally, and I was walking down the hallway and suddenly got grabbed and thrown up against a locker.
Whoa.
Like physically, just like slammed against a locker. The only time that ever happened to me in my student career. And this guy, one of the football players, was holding me against the locker with one hand and holding up a copy of the paper with the other and waving it in my face and saying, "What the hell is this? What the hell is this?" And I looked at him and I was like, what? And he kind of pointed at that article and I realized, oh, he did actually think it was about him, which he wasn't even anywhere in my mind when I wrote it. And it seemed so ridiculous to me that I started laughing, even though I was being clearly threatened with physical retribution here. And that kind of disarmed him. He got confused. And I was like, Mike, it's not about you. Like, it's a joke. And he was just kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, kind of like, don't do it again. And he kind of stalked away. And he came up to me later in the day. He had gone to talk to some of his friends. And he came up to me. He was like, I'm sorry, man. But I had somewhat the same response, which was, wow, something I wrote actually got somebody's attention in a very real and direct way. And it I learned a whole lot of lessons from that right off the bat, both the potentials and perils of writing. But there is some power for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, my situation was very much so the 2021 version of that, because the person who thought this story was about them, they made like social media posts. They didn't necessarily come up to me and throw me against a locker, which in a strange way I almost feel like there's more integrity in that. I'm not saying I'm pro physical abuse or anything, but being behind the screen and saying things is a lot easier. But yeah, I was like, this is cool. I mean, it's having a direct impact, and so ever since then, when I notice that impact, it kind of reminds me that I'm doing this for a reason.
And you can put that power to good use.
Yes.
Well, we're happy to have you here this summer. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah. You've done good work already, and look forward to what else you're going to do here. And certainly we'll have you back on the podcast as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
All right. I think we can look ahead to the coming week, which of course is the week leading up to a holiday weekend. This coming weekend will be Memorial Day weekend, and so not a whole lot going on the civic calendar. County Commission will have its monthly meeting on Monday at 5 p.m. in the main assembly room of the City County building. The big item on their agenda is the county budget, which they did have a formal public hearing on this past Monday, which was, first of all, only one person showed up from the general public to talk about the need for better ambulance service, which is something else we'll probably be talking about in the near future as our new contract has taken effect. But really only one comment from the public, a few comments and questions from county commissioners, but kind of as expected, with it being such a almost flat budget, there isn't a whole lot for anybody to say about it or necessarily object to it, except that they wish there was more money there. So Commission will be voting on that. If they go ahead and vote to approve it, they'll be done with their budget for the coming year. And anything else coming up this coming week, Scott?
No, the rest, other than that, it's pretty quiet on the civic event front.
Of course, we don't know who might get arrested this week.
That's true. And and that's one of the fun things about the job. And then I'm sure Owen is learning is you don't know what's going to happen, and it's part of the fun is something popping up. It's like this week the parking study.
Yep.
I in fact the day before I had asked the city when it was coming out, and they said, well, we should be getting it sometime this week, and next day at noon it pops up, and
coincidentally the day after that survey had been released by the business owners. It's possible the city didn't want to leave that hanging out there for too long.
Yeah, but so I changed gears. Everything I was going to do went out the window that day, and I got to the fun of reading a 168-page report.
You read the whole thing, the whole 168?
Well, no. I read the bulk of it. A lot of those pages were just the city did its own survey of parking survey, so a lot of it was just that survey.
Yeah.
They had every question and everything else.
Yes, the journalist quick read, where
Yes.
you kind of you look for the
read the
topic headings and
you read the executive summary and just go. No, you don't have
and as you said in that case, Scott, the real question was, how much is it going to cost? And
Yeah.
so that's the first thing you go to. Is,
Yeah.
All right, all of this structural stuff and recommendations for better administration. Like, get to the stuff people actually care about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we will be back next week to talk about anything that does happen between now and then. Thanks, as always, to Seth Barber for his production work here with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.